The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of The Face of Small Business, an Experian data study. I'm Gary Stockton, and today's presentation will be led by Peter Bolin, Director of Analytics and Consulting for Experian's Decision Analytics team. A copy of the slides from today's presentation can be found in the handout section of the GoToWebinar console, along with a copy of our white paper. Pete has over 12 years experience in both commercial and consumer lending with such companies as Bank of America, Toyota Motor Credit, and ITT Commercial Finance. He's been with Experian since 2006 and currently consults with clients and partners on a wide variety of engagements, including proof of concept tests, score validations, product development, portfolio profiling, marketing, risk, and trend analysis using business credit data. Prior to joining Experian, Pete was a senior analyst at AmeriQuest Mortgage Services, responsible for forecasting, risk analysis, and reporting. And now I'd like to turn things over to Peter Bolin for today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Gary, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone on the call for attending this webinar today. We're going to dive in deep to the background of the small business owner, comparing and contrasting the small business owner to a random sample of regular U.S. consumers. Why are we doing this? There is a small, however, growing population of commercial lenders out there who make the following claim. We don't need business owners' information. We don't need business owners' personal credit. We don't need the Vantage score. We don't need the FICO score. In fact, we think that those scores might even be misleading. Now, I know a number of you on the call do use consumer information, do use consumer credit information on the business owner's background, and you should. But like I said, there is a growing trend out there that is starting to say, oh, that's okay, all we need is a checking account, all we need is their Google, all we need is we get some Twitter posts, we get some likes on Facebook, we get some Yelp, we're good to go, we don't need credit data, personal nor commercial. Growing trend. I'd like to set the tone with the following quote from a June 14th, 2016 article in American Banker by Penny Crossman. Quote, I'm not going to embarrass anyone, I'm not going to name the company who had this quote, but this is a quote from that article and y'all can look it up online. Quote, the business owner's personal credit score is not that relevant in company X's view. Small business owners are sometimes highly leveraged because they are putting personal assets on the line to get capital for their business, which negatively affects their credit score. Ladies and gentlemen, in the next hour, I am going to debunk that very statement, and I am going to express why it is necessary that you need to bring in commercial information on the business and bring in consumer information, consumer credit information, like credit scores, like their credit report on the business owner. So I'll give you 10 seconds, call your friends, call your families, call your boss. If they have that view, you might want to get them on the line because we are going to address that very issue and make the debate. We're not going to make a presidential debate like last night, but we are going to debate that very comment, and we are going to show why it is necessary to blend that. In order to pull this off, we set out and obtained a random sample of 2.5 million business owners from our database here at Experian, known business owners. This is not a survey. Sometimes when the press calls me, they get very confused. They'll say, well, when did you do the survey? And I said, we didn't do a survey. This is based on 2.5 million business owners, and we obtained their commercial credit report and score, and we obtained their personal credit report and score in order to pull this off. Then our comparison group was a random sample of normal consumers. And then we compared, contrasted the two so we could show you the difference between, the significant difference between the two profiles and why it is important to factor in this type of data when making your credit decisions. So we started out, the first section, we're going to talk about some demographic information about the business owner and compare that to the average consumer. On average, the typical business owner is about 56 years old compared to 51 for the overall consumer. Yes, business owners are a little older. I don't think that should come as any surprise. And we'll talk about the millennials a little bit different, a little bit later. But in general, the business owner is slightly older than the overall population. Not surprisingly then, with the 56, that their small business owner is much more concentrated in the baby boomer generation, while the smallest representation are those millennials. Not surprising, the younger generation hasn't had enough life experience nor professional experience to establish a business. However, over the next 10 years, we anticipate that a larger percentage will enter the ranks of the entrepreneurial class. Why do we say that? Well, back in 2014, there was a study commissioned by the Council of Economic Advisors. This is back in 2014, so it's about 2 years old. And in that study, it was a survey that they did on millennials. And they found that more than half of millennial survey expressed an interest in starting a small business. That is significantly larger than any other generation. So while the millennials are a small part of the business owner ranks now, we anticipate as they move into more of a established life and a more experienced business life, that they will fulfill those desires to be an entrepreneur. So the good news is the younger generations, or for those of you that are on the phone call, I just dated myself. For those of you who are on the phone call who are in the millennial generation, we're waiting for them to come into the business class, and we're excited for that to happen. Business ownership does remain a male-dominated pursuit. The typical business owner is male. We know that they average about 56 years in age and more likely to be a member of the baby boomer generation. However, previous studies at Experian show this is changing. The last webinar we did, or maybe 2 webinars we did, we actually talked about ethnicity and gender, how it relates to small business. So we know that more women are moving into the entrepreneurial class, especially in certain industries such as healthcare, childcare, and salons. So the millennials are changing the demographics. They're also changing the business owner in terms of gender. So we would be interested to see over the next 10 years if this chart is indeed going to change, and we anticipate that it will change, especially if our clients and our customers and the lenders increase access to credit and continue to be advocates for the small business. We are here at Experian. We are advocates of small business, and we're constantly urging. In fact, this presentation is urging access to credit, and hopefully using this information will help increase access to credit across the board. Small business owners are married. Married men that are baby boomers compared to the overall consumer base. Education level. Business owner is much more educated than the U.S. overall population. And indeed, there is a definite skew towards the bachelor and graduate degree portion of the curve. So they're educated, baby boomer males, but that's changing. If we drill down to more simpler terms, this shows business owners are much more likely to have some or more college, 69% to 53%. There is a clear link to older males with higher education from a large generation in the entrepreneurial class. So that's your typical face of a small business owner. The baby boomers are in a position, more so than any generation, to have put in those 10,000 hours. I refer to those 10,000 hours because Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called The Outliers, and in there he does an eloquent job of talking about this concept of in order to become an expert at anything, no matter what, whether you're doing the piano or you're doing the violin, or whether you're a business owner, that 10,000 hours, which is about what? If you do a couple hours a day, that's about 10 years. And once you get those 10,000 hours and you become experienced, you become an expert. So there's no surprise that educated generational baby boomers are in that particular position just by virtue of where they were born. And we think the millennials will even double that based on their interest in being a small business, being interested in owning a small business, and joining that entrepreneurial class and entrepreneurial success. Finally, all those hours in preparation, preparing for that opportunities are well rewarded in terms of monetary success. The average business owner earns 30% more than the U.S. average. So what? Well, keep this particular slide in mind when we talk about personal assets on the line to get capital for their business. Utilization, keep this in mind. On average, the business owner makes more, and that's going to be critical when we talk about some other key credit statistics, particular balance and utilization. So, not surprisingly, small business owners are making more money, especially if their businesses are very profitable. And if we take a look at the distribution, we see a significant skew towards that upper band of 160 plus. With a significant portion, if you take a look at that one at the very end, you're seeing 250K plus. Now that's some serious money. Therefore, a business owner, based on higher incomes, based on significantly higher incomes, does have the capacity, character, capacity, collateral, right? Remember those three, and sometimes you'll have here the four: character, capacity, condition, right? Economic condition. Capacity to pay becomes a critical portion, and if you're not looking at the business owner's personal information, you might miss the fact of their personal capacity to pay. You might miss the fact, how much is your personal guarantee worth? Well, you got to look at the personal assets. You got to look how much their net worth is, how much money they make. What is their personal income? Well, we don't need any of that. We just need some Twitter posts. We need some likes on Facebook. You're missing that information that's going to be critical, helping you get to yes. If a business owner's on the bubble, the business is on the bubble, it's young, it's new, might not have a credit report, but I know that they make 250K plus, that makes it more palatable to approve that $50,000 merchant cash advance, because I know personally that the business owner has the capacity and the collateral to keep me whole. It helps you get to yes. We're helping you get to yes while being the small business owner's advocate in this space. Very important. Not surprisingly, those baby boomers, male baby boomers making high incomes, yes, they want to own a home, so there's doesn't come as a surprise that this would be occurring. Higher average income small business owners are much more likely to be a homeowner. That's going to become critical as we look further into the presentation when we talk about HELOCs. We're going to talk about HELOCs and how they might be using them to fund their business. Keep this in mind. Remember their income. Remember that they're homeowners, because they have an asset there that will help them in collateral and help them fund their business as well. So they're homeowners. So I made just a second. I think we're going to, Gary, I think we're going to do a poll real quick.
Yes, we have our first poll. Who has a higher credit score, business owners or consumers? Let's get the consensus of the audience. I think we may have revealed it, though.
I think I did. I'm sorry. I think I already did.
I think when we get to slide 35, Pete, we've got another check-in for a poll.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I got so excited that I moved too quickly, my error.
Okay.
So yes, as this shows, changing our focus to some key statistics on the consumer side. So now we're going to look at the business owner's consumer credit in an attempt to address that quote. Remember the quote I said earlier, personal credit score is not that relevant. Well, I would like to use the same article that I quote and use another quote. I will not name the person, but you can check it out. Quote from the same article, June 14, 2016, Penny Grossman, entrepreneurs tend to have low FICO scores because they're always scrambling to fund the business. Per so-and-so from such and such company in a town that remains nameless. Even the best ones sometimes have low FICO scores like 600 or 650. Ladies and gentlemen, does this slide agree with that statement? No. As a matter of fact, business owners tend to have significantly higher consumer credit scores. Now, in this particular case, we use the Vantage 3 score. It has significantly higher score than the overall consumer. Directly opposite of what is out there in the conventional press. So when you talk about thought leadership, I'm hoping that we're bringing some information to everyone that is eye-opening, because there is that strain of thought out there that we don't need consumer information, we don't need commercial information, and this is a good example of that. On average, small business owners tend to have higher personal credit scores than the overall consumer. And the good news is they're increasing over time. So are the overall consumers. That's all good news as well. But small business owners are increasing their score, overall consumers are increasing their score as you look at that 3-year trend. In addition, we discovered the average balances across all credit relationships is much higher for business owners than the U.S. consumer overall. This is total balance, including mortgages. You can see much more likely to have higher incomes. That's supporting these higher balances. Looking at the number of open trades. So we like to look at the number of open trades in terms of thickness of file. This is how we evaluate what we call the thickness of file. Thicker files tend to be more predictive than thinner files. So we already saw where the business owner has a higher Vantage 3 score. Well, what's driving that? They have almost twice as thick of file. The number of credit trades or relationships on the consumer credit report, a quintessential attribute to gauge that thickness of file. And this is one indication of the relative credit sophistication as well. So when we talk about character, capacity, collateral capacity, business owners are already sophisticated in using credit. Why? Because they already have it on their personal side. So getting a commercial loan is probably not that big of a deal because they're already sophisticated enough to understand how to use that credit. Very important. And if you're not looking at the consumer information, you might miss this concept and it might prevent you from getting to yes. What about seeking credit? We've seen that business owners have a thicker file. We just talked about that. But they're also interested in seeking credit because almost 2 trades have been opened in the last 24 months for the business owner compared to less than 1.5 for the average consumer. So they're using credit, they got good credit scores, they got mortgages, they're running the balances up, they have a thicker file, and they're not afraid to open. So that talks about their propensity to consume credit as well. Much more significant than the consumer overall. So what? Well, need to think about that behavior when you're marketing to them. So if there's any marketers on the phone who might be saying, well, that's risk is great. What does it mean for me as a marketer because I'm targeting? Well, target the business owner, look at their consumer information because that will give you a glimpse that they're out there consuming and that they might be in the market because they're in the market personally. They might be in the market commercially. Average monthly payments, very interesting concept. In this case, we're excluding mortgages, are extremely useful in evaluating that individual cash flow. Some of my clients actually use this type of attribute, the ones that do use consumer information. They'll use this in evaluating that debt burden, right? Front and back end ratios. They'll look at their total payments on the business owner side. They'll factor that in. They'll look at the same payments on the commercial side as well. And on average, non-mortgage monthly payments are a cash flow out, correct? So the typical owner's monthly payments are more than twice that of the average. But in relation to that income, and we saw that their incomes are higher, they're able to support that payment. They have the capacity to make this. So if you say, if you think or you say, well, they're running up their balances, oh my goodness, I'm not going to use that data, you're missing the other side. They also have a capacity to pay that and to maintain that relationship and pay them. So going back to the quote, going back to the prevailing wisdom that I don't want to use consumer information because they're running up their assets, they're putting their assets on the line to get capital, that might be the case, but they're able to maintain those because of those high incomes, and it's trickling down to their score. Credit limits are reserved for the very top credit scores, large credit limits, right? Large credit limits tend to go to those that have high scores in general across commercial and consumer lending. And here we show that. So it's no surprise business owners are offered high limits and obtain higher average limits as well, because we know that they're shopping for credit, 1.8 trades. We know that they're using credit. We saw some balances. Compared to the overall consumer, who isn't as thick as in file, might not be as sophisticated as the business owner. So the business owner is sophisticated, they got good credit, they're managing those credits because they have higher capacity to pay, and they're getting offered better limits. Knowing that information, would that change your decisions to approve if you had this information? You know that they're more sophisticated, you know that they're lower risk on the consumer, and that they come for a $50,000 loan, maybe a merchant advance, maybe a working line, maybe an installment loan. Is that going to put them over the edge personally? Probably not, because they're already maintaining high credit limits as we speak, and if you're not looking at that behavior, it might not help you get to yes. Speaking of those limits, let's put it in another spin. The interesting trend in utilization, also known as the balance to limit ratio. It's actually falling since 2014 and on a 3-year downward trend, while the average consumer is slightly increasing their utilization over the same period. So to any extent that the business owner is putting, quote, their personal assets in jeopardy, this suggests that they're actually deleveraging over time, which is a great news for small business lenders. Over the last 2 to 3 years post-recession, as we get that recession in 2008 further and further into our rear view mirror, business owners are getting their house in order. This has potential for starting the next commercial lending boom, because this alone tells me, and hopefully you all would agree, business owners are getting their balance to limit ratios in order, getting things tightened up, putting them in a good position for further growth. especially when you look at the overall consumers who are slightly doing the exact opposite, kind of running those up a little bit or remaining the same. Total balance. So in the previous slide, I talked about the mortgage balance. Now we're talking about total balance. Look at that. Look at that. The small business owner, total balance on their consumer credit report, almost twice the balance. Now, this one does include mortgages, by the way, so there are mortgages in here. Open or closed balances, which including mortgages, as you can see, their balances are significantly higher, almost twice that. Well, we know that they're already a homeowner, so that would be in here as well. But that's okay, because now they have some equity to potentially fund those business in case it gets tight, which is character, capacity, collateral. Collateral, what's your personal guarantee worth? You look here, do they have a home? When did they buy the home? They have equity. What's my personal guarantee worth? They have collateral to help. If you're ignoring that, it might not help you get to yes. That's what we're here. We're going to help you with data to get to yes. Total balances, yes, they're high, but they're maintaining them. Yes, their average payments are high, but their credit score is high. Why? Because they got the capacity to do so. That's the story. And if that's the behavior, not just the story, statistically, that's the behavior. That's the background of a small business owner that needs to be looked at because it'll help you get the yes, which, as you can tell, is a reoccurring theme. How can we get you to yes on the phone? How can we be an advocate for the small business owners? And at Experian, we want to bring both of you all together. We want to bring you all both together to help our economy grow. And as we saw from last night's debate, both, left and right, both of them spoke about the small business owner and the importance, and this is why, because they're fueling the economy. Delinquencies. So let's look at the business owner's delinquencies on bank cards. This is one or more bank card trades, the percentage one or more bank card trades 90 plus days beyond terms. And what do you see? Not surprisingly, because we already know their credit background, we already know that they have high credit scores. The trade percentage one or more 90 plus, significantly lower for the business owners. They're paying those bills. They're paying their revolving bank card trades much better than the overall consumer. They have the sophistication to understand, I need to pay my bills, I need to do so on time, I need to keep my credit good. Gary, do we have a bankrupt poll before I go too far?
We do not, no.
Okay. All right, great. So let's talk about bankruptcies. Okay, a little bit slightly negative story here, but don't panic. Don't panic. Business owners file more personal bankruptcies compared to the average U.S. consumer. That's what we're showing. As we discussed, though, business owners tend to use their personal credit to fund their businesses. That is true, especially for the smaller ones. So that portion is actually true, which in some cases does result in undue pressure on their personal finances. However, bankruptcy is not the end-all, be-all. It's not, doesn't have to necessarily be a death knell, right? Business owners, like the business, are allowed to reorganize in bankruptcy. And in some cases, and in many cases, one of the hardest things for us to explain at the Bureau, and anyone who does credit scores, the hardest thing that we have to explain is this phenomenon. Pete, my buddy has been in bankruptcy for 2 years, and she has a higher credit score than I do, and I've never been bankrupt. How do you explain that? That's a difficult thing to explain, and the explanation is, over the last 2 years, as that bankruptcy gets further and further in the rearview mirror, If you remain current, it mutes the effect of that bankruptcy, and you begin to improve your credit score if you remain current, if your balances are low, your utilization is in check. You can actually improve your score. Now, I didn't tell you that I'm also presently got 3 of my trades are 90 plus. So when I get confronted with that, I'll ask the person a little more questions. Well, you're telling me you're 100% current? Well, no, not really, because, you know, I did miss that payment 2 months ago. Well, there you go. Recently delinquent will hurt your score, whether versus that delinquency which occurred when you were 21, unless you're 21 on the phone. In my case, I am not blessed being that young. As the delinquency gets further in the rearview mirror, it's going to eventually help your score. So yes, on the downside, business owners do tend to have more bankruptcies, but they're also savvy. They're also post-petition bankruptcy or post-bankruptcy are doing a much better job in maintaining that credit, as evidenced by their delinquencies on bank cards and as their evidence as their credit score. Tax liens. Yep. Another little bit of a negative story, a little bit of a, yes, they do declare a little bit more bankruptcy. Yes, they do have a little bit more tax liens. But let's keep this in context. Being a business owner, running a business, you put yourself in their shoes. They are inundated with regulation and taxes like you would not believe, and they have to constantly be on the tax code. The tax code, as you all know, is sophisticated. The tax code changes. The tax code changes from potentially year to year depending on the political climate. The tax code changes based on which political party is in office. Let me give you an example. Back in March, tax code section 179 of the tax code is a very good example. This portion of the tax code allows for certain exemptions, taxable write-offs for certain purchases of equipment, including certain types of trucks and SUVs. It's sometimes referred to as the Hummer tax because that particular vehicle qualified for this equipment lease. And there, I don't know the exact specifics, but there are qualifications for each type of piece of equipment that qualifies. Congress had been battling that back and forth. Well, put yourself in the situation of a small business owner. If you know that you can write off for that exemption, it may dictate how you're going to purchase your next vehicle or how you're going to use that next equipment. So it tends to keep, it puts an extra pressure on the small business owner to have to pay attention to taxes. And what if the small business owner says, oh, Congress is going to continue that exemption. I'm going to go out and buy 3 new trucks with an 8-foot bed, because the size of the bed, I think, is one of the criteria. It has to be a certain length to qualify. And then, oh, geez, I was looking forward to extending that exemption on my tax return, but you know what? A new Congress came in and they took that exemption away. Uh-oh. What's going to happen? I might not be able to pay my taxes on that because I was assuming the tax break. Now I got a lien. Now I have a cash flow problem. I might have an issue. And this is what that slide, I think, is referring to. Tax codes are sophisticated. They're complicated. It changes. The 179 is a good example. The positive is that that 179 did get approved in March, so small business owners can write that off. And I anticipate, if not already happening, that the leasing industry is going to be booming because certain leases of those properties, there was pent-up demand, and business owners were waiting to see that, and it's probably exploding. So I would anticipate, if not some folks on the phone might hopefully already be experiencing it, a boom in commercial leasing as business owners take advantage of that Section 179 tax code. HELOCs, very important piece of information that's critical to commercial lending. I'm not going to use consumer information on the business owner. I don't think it's necessary. Okay, Well, maybe you might be missing that these business owners might be using HELOCs to actually fund that business. Over twice the number have at least one HELOC trade. So yes, they own a home. It would appear that they're tapping into those. We think that they're probably funding those business. They have equity. They have a resource. What's the value of my personal guarantee? All of those things are factors in helping you make a smarter decision, and if you're one that approves everything, helping you price that loan, helping you appropriately price the loan for risk. Yes, the business owners are much more likely to have at least one or more HELOC trade. And they're using them. Here's the balances. No surprise. Small business owners and consumers that have at least one HELOC trade, the average size is 50% larger, almost than the business for business owners. So yes, they have HELOCs, and yes, they are using them. Important information that is needed. Important behavior, not just information, important behavior about that business owner that needs to be factored in. You cannot find this from a Twitter post. You cannot find this from a Yelp recommendation. You cannot find this information from a likes on Facebook. You need to use this information to help you get to yes. Personal finance trades, same story. Are they using personal finance trades? Well, yes, but not to the same degree that they're using those HELOCs. So this is the percentage that have one or more open personal finance trades in the last 24 months. Are they out there looking to open up personal finance trades? Yes, but not too much. Not too much when compared to the overall consumer. A little bit more than them, but not significantly. Unless, why would you need to? Because you already got that HELOC, and I guarantee you that HELOC rate is a heck of a lot better than a personal finance rate, right? Personal finance trade, you're probably looking 8, 9, 10, 11, 12%, even with those high credit scores. Your HELOC is probably significantly lower than that. So personal trades, I spoke to a client who was very curious about this. They were on the impression that, you know, I think they're actually funding the business with personal finance trades. Well, maybe not so much, maybe a little bit. When we look at their balances are almost twice as large. So, well, maybe they are using them to a certain degree. Maybe they are using them to a certain degree, Pete. So they have personal balances, tend to be using it, although the dollar amounts are not as significant as the HELOC. I still think that they're probably focusing on that HELOC to keep these balances have a high rate. They probably want to keep those down. Maybe not funding the business with those versus the HELOC. Maybe they have other uses for those. But look at that. We know that they have personal finance trades. We know that they have HELOCs. We know that they have mortgage. That's a very sophisticated background, very sophisticated behavior that they can tap in, and that you can tap in to if you ever, God forbid, you ever have to enforce the personal guarantee, you ever have to enforce your broad lien UCC, you ever curious about what the value of their personal assets are. These are all collateral, right? Collateral, capacity, all the good old-fashioned 3 C's that you're not going to find on Twitter. We're going to do a little bit of a move starting here. We're going to now look at credit scores, both consumer and commercial, to talk about how effective each of those scores are in predicting risk. So we started at the beginning with some information about the personal demographics of the business, age, income, gender, right? Then we moved into some key statistics around their credit, We explored all the different types of credit. Now we're going to attack the concept. Well, I'm going to attack the concept of, in the same article, June 14, 2016, I would like to read to you a quote to set the stage for why we're going through this. Quote, one marketplace lender told so-and-so that his company built a model that proves conclusively that looking at a business owner's FICO score is not only unhelpful, but actually misleading. One marketplace lender told this person that his company built a model that proves conclusively that looking at a business owner's FICO score is not only unhelpful, they're going to double down on that unhelpful, but actually misleading. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look into that particular, and we're going to address that next. Personal credit scores, FICO, Vantage 3. Vantage 3 is the consortium. Vantage is the same product, competing product of FICO. We're going to talk about that. Is it really misleading or not necessary? We're going to talk about that now. This distribution is comparing the business owners and the consumer and looking at the bad rates of each of the bad rate distribution by score band. How did we define bad real quickly? In this particular case, there's many ways to define bad. We define bad as 15% or more trades 91 plus days beyond terms or past due in the last 12 months on the consumer, using consumer data. And as you can see, the bad rates for the business owner, especially even in that lower Vantage 3 band, is significantly lower. If you look at the bad rates all the way along, you see that the business owner tends to be has a lower bad rate up until that really high FICO score, and you start to see that change a little bit. That could be driven by the fact that, yes, they do have a little bit more utilization, but on average their bad rates are significantly lower. So the score, with all due respect, the score is doing a very good job rank ordering the bad rate of those business owners. Like I said, we're going to change our focus. We'll be taking a look at only business owners and how their consumer and commercial behavior changes and as the age of the business change. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at, does the age of a business affect any of this? And that's a very important aspect, because I know a lot of lenders, a lot of clients have very strong, hard and fast rules around age of business. We're going to start to take a look at some of that as well. So on the x-axis, you see age of business. Then you look at the total number of open trades. You get to see an interesting trend here, because I've been going about the sophistication and thickness of file. So now we're going to talk about a little bit of that in relation to the age of the business. And as you can see, as the business gets older, the number of commercial trades, which gets thicker for the business owner. That's the green bar. So the green bars are the business owner's commercial trades. The light green bar are the business owner's consumer trades. And what do you see as the business gets older? As the business gets older, you start to see a divergence. Commercial thickness goes up, consumer thickness starts to go down. As the business owner, and we preach this as an advocate all the time, and here it appears that they're listening. We encourage all business owners to eventually funnel their business stuff all through their commercial credit, keeping their consumer stuff separately, and that will definitely help their scores even improve past the averages the high average that we already seen. And it would appear that that's what they're doing already. As the business gets older, it can start to stand on its own, right? And that's what this is showing. As the business gets older, their business trades are increasing, their consumer trades are decreasing as it begins to shift a little bit and the business stands on its own. If you look at the balances, the percentage change in balances between the business inception and each of the years. So from the beginning of the business, we looked into how many that were 2 years old, how many that were 3 to 5, how many that were 6+. You start to see their balance behavior change significantly. The business trades are increasing balances. The consumer balances is actually decreasing over time. So again, you start to see the same behavior, which is important to evaluate in terms of risk. Older businesses, you're starting to see that trend where maybe they're not putting their their consumer assets at risk anymore. Maybe they were a little bit at the beginning. So using commercial data, using consumer data in the mix is very much time sensitive depending on where those businesses are on their continuum of experience. Finally, we're going to conclude with showing the predictiveness of the Vantage score or the consumer risk score equivalent. We're going to use the Vantage score. In order to do that, we're going to show you how predictive it is because I'm trying to address the fact you don't need it. It might be misleading and it doesn't work. Absolutely not. And here we go. We did a validation between business owners and consumers. A validation, we go back a year. We obtained that credit information on the business and the business owner. And then we asked the question at that time, how well did that score predict 12 months in the future? One of the main statistical measures that we use is something called the Kolmogorov-Smirnov statistic. You will see that. However, there is no test. Kolmogorov-Smirnov statistic is the industry standard, which measures the maximum separation between the goods and the bads. In a nutshell, for those not statistically minded, the higher the KS, the better the score is at predicting. The better the score is distinguishing or discriminating between the goods and the bads. And that's what we did in order to drive the point home how well the scores actually do work. If we look at those bad rates, 91 plus, 15% or more, 91 plus on commercial payment behavior now, folks, commercial behavior. Does the Vantage score still predict commercial behavior? Does commercial stores data still predict commercial behavior? So we're looking at commercial delinquency to prove the point that it is necessary. These are the bad rates. If you look at the bad rates by age of business, what do you see? Not surprisingly, as the business gets older, their bad rates are decreasing. Younger business are definitely higher risk. And that 0 to 2, there is a bad rate almost 3 times as much as those that have been in business 21 years. Hopefully not surprising. Now we look similar to bad rate decreasing. This trend shows average scores for a business and business owner are increasing. So on one axis on the left, you have the IPv2 score. That's our flagship commercial-only score, only using commercial data. On the right-hand side, you see the consumer score, which is the Vantage 2. As the business gets older, of course, you see that the scores are increasing at a very nice rate as they get older. Your risk for older businesses are getting lower as they've been in business longer. Not surprising. However, what might be surprising, look at the average Vantage score for a business owner that has been in business 0, very new, to 2 years. Look at that blue line. Remember my comment, you don't need consumer credit, it's misleading. Well, what we're showing is that even for small businesses, even for new businesses, small business, that score is about a 86, 89. even they are higher on average because the average consumer has a score of about a 670. So even younger businesses, their credit is very, very good, and their personal credit is even better than the average. So do business owners have a lower score than anybody else? No, they actually have higher scores, even for small businesses, even for new business owners, helping you get to yes, which is why you need to capture this information in making better decisions. Bad capture. So what we do is, another statistic we look at is how many bads, what percentage of bads are captured in that lowest 30 percentile. A good credit score, the better the credit score, the more bads are being pushed to the lowest scoring region. So basically the lowest scoring is, you could think of it this way, hey, if I cut my cutoffs at 30% and I decline everyone who scores in the 30% or lower of the population, how many bads would I capture? And in this case, for the businesses from 1 to 2 years, even if you were to use only the consumer score, which I don't recommend, but if you use only the consumer score, 65% of those commercial bads, over 60, would be captured in the lowest 30, even if you just use that alone. However, if you blend them and use both, ladies and gentlemen, you see that that number almost goes up 10%. Almost 75% of those bads are pushed when you use both. We're giving you a better tool, and in factoring in both situations, you got the best, and you're able to make a better decision. Yes, incorporate checking account information, absolutely. Yes, factor in alternative data. Yes, those will definitely help, but you cannot ignore commercial and consumer data. It is not misleading. It is valuable, and here is why.
Peter, I think we had a poll on this on the next slide. Let me know if you want to launch it. So we're asking the audience, which model is the most predictive? Blended, commercial, or consumer? We'll give this a few seconds. Okay, it's looking like the blended is coming out way on top at 85%, 8% commercial, 8% consumer. So we had about 75% of the audience voted. So 84% is blended. So strong consensus there, Pete.
Well, we have a very smart audience today. They are correct. The blended is by far the best predictor of commercial risk when we blend both of them, almost a high KS, almost of a 40. And again, that you look at the consumer KS, the predictiveness. Even in that 0 to 2, very young companies, it cannot be ignored because it is predictive. It is not misleading. Right here, we show it is very predictive. Now, yes, as we get older, it does tend to get less, I said less important, not important, less. And that's why we encourage even for older companies to use that blended information, because as you can see, if you take the blue bar plus the orange bar, you get to that red bar. So by combining the two, even for older companies, there still is lift in terms of predictiveness. And again, the behavior of the consumer and the business owner is predictive. This shows it. It's not misleading. It's not unhelpful. It is quite the opposite, ladies and gentlemen. So if you leave with one thing and one thing only, commercial information, consumer information, alternative information, banking checking account information, good old-fashioned character, capacity, collateral, you put those together, will help you make better decisions, help you make more loans, help you get to yes, help you be more profitable, help you find better loans, you factor all of those in. It'll be good for the small business owner, it'll be good for your companies, and ultimately it will be good for America, regardless of who is in office. Thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to discussing and talking to you about this in the future.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Pete, and I want to thank everybody for attending today's session, and also to Ray Anden for contributions to the research. A lot of hard work went into this deck with Pete and Ray Anden partnering on this. For more information on Experian Insights, please visit our website, experian.com/B2B. Experian really cares a lot about the format of our data study webinars, so we'd really appreciate your responses to our short 5-question survey when you exit. It really helps us determine whether our webinars are hitting the mark. And last, we'll be sending you a follow-up email with information about the recording and where you can go for further insights. Join us on October the 11th, 10 a.m. Pacific, for Which Creditors Get Priority When Businesses Face a Financial Burden. It's another webinar we have coming up. More information can be reached at bit.ly/whogetspriority. We hope to see you there. And so thank you to everybody for joining us, and have a great day.